Welcome to The Edge. I'm joined by Geoff Schumacher, Vice President of Exhibits and Programs at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. Geoff also is the author of two essential books about Las Vegas, Sun, Sin, and Suburbia, an essential history of modern Las Vegas, and the book about Howard Hughes, Power, Paranoia, and Palace Intrigue. Geoff, thank you for joining us today. I can't remember when there's been a bigger story in Las Vegas over recent months, at least, than the closing of the Tropicana at the south end of the Strip near the airport, one of the last mob-linked resorts on the Strip with original construction intact. If you would, Geoff, what's a little mob history about the Tropicana, and why is its closing so controversial?
Yeah, so when you think about the Tropicana, it's one of those iconic logos. It's one of those iconic names from the early golden years of Las Vegas, right? You've got the Flamingo and the Sahara and the Tropicana, the Riviera. These are the names that people think of when they think of that golden age in Las Vegas. The Tropicana opened in 1957, and it was the product of a man named Ben Jaffe. Ben Jaffe had been an executive at the Fontainebleau and Miami Beach. He had obviously connections to different individuals involved in the underworld, one of whom was a man named Phil Castell. Phil Castell was from New Orleans and was a partner of Frank Costello. Frank Costello being one of the biggest New York mob bosses of that era. And so it was pretty clear, it became clear, I should say, before too long, that the Tropicana did in fact have these mob connections. And what happened is, about 3 weeks after the Tropicana opened, there was an attempt on Frank Costello's life in the lobby of his apartment complex on Central Park West in New York. And the shooter, the assassin, shot at Costello, and he hit him, but he didn't kill him. The bullet grazed the side of his head, and so there was a lot of blood. It may have seemed like he was killed, but he wasn't, and it was fairly minor injury. Well, the police came, they talked to Costello. Of course, he didn't see anything. He had no idea who had shot him. He probably did know, but he didn't talk about it. And so the police are flummoxed. They're like, we need something. They're digging around in Costello's coat pockets, his suit coat pocket, and they come across a piece of paper with handwritten notes that have a bunch of numbers. And it so happens that these numbers that were written down on this piece of paper coincided perfectly with the casino win up to that time at the Tropicana Hotel. There was no hard evidence to know exactly what was going on here, other than the fact that Costello was tied to the Tropicana, and he was undoubtedly tied to the Trop through Phil Castell. So there were, in Nevada, there was a bit of a panic, like, oh boy, here we go. We already have the feds on our back. They're concerned about mob involvement in Las Vegas. We need to do something. So the Nevada gaming officials cracked down. Phil Castell, was kind of pushed out. Costello didn't have his contact there anymore. And they brought in J. Kell Housels. He had been a minority owner already, but they brought in Housels to run the Trop. And he did so successfully for a decade. And he's the guy who brought the Folie Bergère there. He's the guy who made the Tropicana into an iconic Las Vegas Strip resort.
And then over time, you had, Carl Thomas was later convicted of skimming, heard on surveillance audio in Kansas City, mob bosses' relatives' home, talking about skimming, and was actually convicted skimming case involving the Trop. So you had a long history of mob involvement at the Trop. And Geoff, that part is part of the public. There just seems to be, back when you and I worked together at the Las Vegas Sun, back in the 90s and beyond, it doesn't seem like there was that much controversy over some of these, the Stardust, the Sands, some of these older places, the Desert Inn, that were mob linked being demolished. But this one, for some reason, seems to be striking a nerve. Is it because it's one of the last of the mob places, or is it because there's some some pushback about the Oakland A's building a stadium on that site. Why does this one seem to be of a heightened interest?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I think there's some truth to that. I also, though, feel like, for example, back in the day when the Sands was going to be torn down, there was a formalized public opposition to that. Former Sands employees and local historians and others who kind of almost organized an effort to try to save the Sands. We're not necessarily seeing that with the Tropicana, and it might simply be that we know the inevitable. We know that this is going to happen, so there's nothing we can do about it. Whereas maybe we were a little naive in the 90s and we thought, oh, maybe we can save one of these old hotels. The truth is the Tropicana has been dragging for a while. They haven't made improvements, and it's not in the best shape. And the Trop was one of those casinos that did not really make the transition during the 90s. The 90s was the mega resort era. You brought in the MGM and the Luxor and the Mandalay Bay and the Mirage and all of these, the Bellagio, and all of these casinos appeared with 3,000, 4,000 rooms and all of these restaurants and attractions. And the Trop never really responded to that. And I think people here kind of know that. Now, that said, there's the Folies Bergère. And the Folies Bergère was such an iconic part of Las Vegas that connection to the Tropicana was very strong. And keep in mind, like the Folies Bergère brought Siegfried and Roy to Las Vegas. They brought to prominence in Las Vegas. They brought Lance Burton, the magician, here. This was the show that was, synonymous with Las Vegas entertainment. So there's a lot of strong feelings about the Tropicana because of its history, not just the mob history, but the entertainment history. I do think the move of the A's to that site has definitely generated another level of discussion about the Tropicana and whether this is the best way to use that property. Keep in mind, it's right on the corner. The baseball field is intended to be right on the corner of Tropicana and Las Vegas Boulevard, right across the street from the MGM, across the street from the Excalibur in New York. And that's prime real estate, right? That's where casinos go. And the idea that a baseball field will be built there isn't, not everybody loves this idea. I think everybody loves the idea of professional baseball coming to Las Vegas, but there are some other factors that go into that. One of them is that, the state of Nevada, the Nevada legislature approved a $380 million, basically subsidy for this project. And then there's the fact that the owner of the A's is not well-loved individual. People are very suspicious of whether he is the partner that Las Vegas really wants to work with. That's a contrast to, say, the unbelievably great ownership of the Vegas Golden Knights with Bill Foley, who could not be a better owner, it seems like. So, these are the factors that are going into the controversy, I think.
Yeah, and you guys at the Mob Museum are perfectly positioned in that transition from old to new Las Vegas. I think there's heightened interest in the way Las Vegas used to be. Yeah. And now with 1,000 casinos around the country, tribal or commercial, sports betting legal in 38 states, Nevada doesn't have a monopoly anymore on gaming. So Las Vegas's effort to position itself as the sports capital of the world is a part of that transition. I know back when you and I were together at the Sun, I couldn't have imagined a Stanley Cup, an ice hockey team, number one, coming to Las Vegas and a Stanley Cup. So that transition, and there is a lot of nostalgia for the way Las Vegas used to be, which again, you guys are positioned to sort of explain that history, more than sort of, completely explain that history. There are also, I know there's a lot up in the air about what's going to happen. I guess they're looking at some sort of demolition in October, possibly tentatively. There's going to be another resort built at that site, Bally's Las Vegas, tentative name. What a lot of interest in, and it may not be known now, but a lot of interest in what's going to happen to a lot of those artifacts. Mario Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola wrote The Godfather there. Frank Rosenthal used to live there. The Robert De Niro and Sharon Stone character. So there's just a ton of interest in that history. Does anybody know what's going to happen to the artifacts, specifically that glass ceiling, that stained glass ceiling, which is iconic. Has there been a discussion about that, or is that just sort of still unknown?
There's a lot of stuff going on right now to preserve the artifacts, the pieces of the Tropicana that are worth saving, and we are involved in that. The Neon Museum is involved in that. The Showgirl Museum is involved, and others, and UNLV is involved, and we're all working with the Trop in hopes that a lot of this great stuff is going to be preserved in one way or another. Sometimes size is an issue for museums. Like, oh, let's save a ceiling. It's like, where are you going to put it? But there are a lot of opportunities. One thing that I think is balancing with that, though, is that it was noted to me last week, it was somebody at the Trop mentioned that this property has gone through 4 owners over the last short period of time. And every time an owner would come in, predictably, they'd start throwing stuff away. So probably a fair amount of this history has been lost, sadly, to the incinerator. But there are still some great things there. We're hoping to benefit in some way. Hopefully, we can acquire an artifact or two from the Tropicana. I know the Neon Museum is thinking about it. I know that UNLV is working on it. So I feel like we are going to see some preservation. And then what will happen after that is they'll probably have a big auction. And the auction, then the public will have a shot at some of these items as well. But, there is a strong feeling about the Tropicana.
Definitely. And I'd love to see some of that end up where you guys are. I'm thinking back to a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe now, where the Elk Court, now downtown, to those who aren't familiar with the area, downtown Las Vegas, south of Sahara, technically outside the city limits where most of the big resorts are. So downtown, there still are some resorts that date back to the mob era still in operation. One, the El Cortez, I'm thinking back, Geoff, to a couple of years ago where they took some of the carpet, made pieces available to the public for sale. So at some point there does need to be, I think there's a lot of sentiment. I think you're right to save a lot of that. And I think for it to end up where you guys are would be perfect. Geoff, first of all, thank you for joining us, and thank you for that perspective on what's going on at the Tropicana. It really is touching a nerve. It's funny when even on social media sites, you just see some, and maybe that's part of what's hyped up the discussion about this demolition is social media now has a lot of conversation. But you do see some people who are angry about it, and some people are like, look, this thing's past its prime. Let's get the A's here. Is that sort of the feeling that's out there on the street?
I think so. I in some ways, the Tropicana and the A's are almost like two different things in a way. Like, the Tropicana is a piece of Las Vegas history. There's there's a group of people who want to preserve it. They think we want to save it the way you would the building the Mob Museum is in, a historic building. But we've seen, though, that on the Las Vegas Strip, you have to be in a constant state of evolution in order to be successful. For Las Vegas to be successful, we can't rely on these old buildings anymore because there's so many new things you need to offer to guests. And you have a lot, as you noted, a lot of competition around the country and around the world, not only for gambling, but for entertainment and luxury resort amenities. So Las Vegas has to be competitive on the Las Vegas Strip in particular. So I think there's a Tropicana field. Then there's the baseball. And that is sports fans and other people who are thinking about whether this is the best use for this space, whether this is the best organization to come to Las Vegas to represent and be our baseball team. But to be fair, there's a lot of positivity about the A's too. I don't want to make it seem like it's all doom and gloom. In fact, there's many people who are super excited about the idea of being able to go to a ball game right here in our hometown. So it's just like the hockey fans and the football fans. The idea of having a team here, it was so unimaginable 15 years ago in Las Vegas when all of these sports leagues were like trying to stay as far away from Las Vegas as possible. They didn't want to be tied to the gambling in any way. And then they kind of did a 180, and now they all embrace gambling. We've actually had a couple little controversies lately in sports with players gambling, which is going to be something these leagues are going to have to deal with. But overall, they're embracing Las Vegas in a way that they shunned us before. It's just this kind of this astonishing flip.
It is an astonishing flip. And while Las Vegas is still population size a small market, that doesn't really reflect the number of visitors who come to Las Vegas every year. Plus, Geoff, I mean, honestly, man, and you see it around town, when a visiting team comes to town, when like the Edmonton Oilers or the Montreal Canadiens or somebody comes to Las Vegas, you see the trip. Las Vegas is a great out of town trip to go to for fans, and it will be that for baseball, presumably too. So,
And and you're right. And my only worry is like in the case of the Vegas Golden Knights, because been so successful, there's always still a larger majority of Vegas Golden Knights fans in the audience than there are Edmonton Oilers fans. If the A's are not very good, I could see the Boston Red Sox fans like taking over the stadium, right? And we don't want that. So we're Dodger fans, or God forbid. So I feel like we need to be sure the A's are competitive, so there's a sufficient number of A's fans in the stadium.
I went to some games in St. Petersburg before before the Rays became more successful, and you would see more Red Sox and Yankees fans sometimes in the stadium. Geoff, thank you so much. Before we sign off, I know the Mob Museum has a constant, fantastic array of speakers, guests, programs. What are some things coming up that people either in person in Las Vegas can take advantage of, or online that you guys have available coming up in the next several months?
Yeah, we've got a few really good programs coming up, and I'm excited about them. One is Paul Moses, writer, has written a new book about the Italian Squad. And the Italian Squad was one of the earliest anti-organized crime squads in American policing. And it was in New York, and it was led by a man named Joseph Petrosino, legendary police officer, died tragically trying to track down, organized crime figures in Italy. Well, Paul has done a masterful job on a book about that period, and he's going to come and speak to the museum at the museum on April 9th, so next week. Later in the month, on April 25th, we have a blockbuster program on the Philadelphia mob. For whatever reason, we have never done a program focused on the Philly mob. So we're going to have George Anastasia, the legendary writer, on the panel, as well as George Martorano, who historically his father was involved with the Philly mob and had his own involvement with organized crime. And then I think the only thing that we can top that with is on May 8th, we're going to do a program called Sons of the Pioneers. And Sons of the Pioneers is going to feature Jack Binion, son of Benny Binion, Michael Gaughan, son of Jackie Gaughan, Governor Bob Miller, who you're familiar with, son of Ross Miller, who ran the Riviera, and John Bailey, who was the son of Bob Bailey, who was the great black entertainment person from Moulin Rouge back in the day. So this is going to be unbelievable to have Jack Binion on a stage in the Mob Museum, for example. And then I want to, little mention too, the Mob Museum does all of this educational content. We also like to have fun. And we're going to celebrate the 6th anniversary of our underground. That's our speakeasy and distillery in the basement of the Mob Museum. And we're going to celebrate that with a big party on April 18th. So very exciting stuff. The spring is very busy. Actually, we're busy year round, but the spring is when we really do some amazing programs. So we're excited to share that.
Those are fantastic. I can't wait for those. And you mentioned Ross Miller at the Riviera. Reminded me of Slots of Fun and Circus. Carl Thomas was involved. So there still are some places that go back to that mob area. Geoff Schumacher, Vice President, Exhibits and Programs at the Mob Museum. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm Larry Henry at Gambling.com. Thank you for joining us on The Edge.